The Subconsciousness in Buddhism by Venerable Rungruang Papassaro, Dr. Rungruang Limchoopatipa. In Buddhism, there is no difference between the consciousness and subconsciousness like in modern psychology because life is an act of a stream of consciousness. However, we will clarify the terms consciousness and subconsciousness by how they function in terms of mind processing. The subconsciousness in modern psychology is the part of inner mind where the mind is in the early states of mind processing after receiving stimulus from the world, saying the first round of the process of dependent origination. Later, this signal processing will be escalated by volitional formations or thinking in many rounds of the process of dependent origination, and then it will turn out to be strong emotional thought which will dominate the whole mind when being conscious. As a result, when being conscious in daily life, we will mostly experience with mental phenomena in the area of consciousness, while the mental phenomena which are hidden or suppressed in the area of subconsciousness are usually covered up by plenty of emotional thoughts. And in the early part of the Buddhist practice, we have to establish mindfulness to abandon arising emotional thoughts of lower fetters one by one, before dwelling to the first jhana. This part of Buddhist practice is just like peeling off each shell of onion layer by layer before getting into the core of onion. The Buddha compared the mind like a bowl of water composed of the varieties of color dyes. What color the water will be depends on the types of the mixture of ingredients. Typically, emotional thoughts will be the reflection of what a person behaves and takes actions in responding to the world, while what happening inside the inner mind is the portion of the origin of mind processing before it will be escalated to become emotional thought. And since the mind is fully dominated by the varieties of emotional thoughts, as a result, what we mostly aware of the mind in daily life are emotional thoughts and feeling. Therefore, in order to study the mind, we have to dwell into the inner mind to explore what really the mind is. In the Buddhist study on the mind, this technique is called the right concentration, to dwell the mind in serenity state of being calm, so-called the jhana. Typically, there are three possibilities in terms of methodology to dwell to the level of subconsciousness, whereas the part of mind of which one is not usually aware of but which influences one's actions and feelings from inner mind as follows. Firstly, in modern psychology makes use of hypnotherapy to study human mind and its functions by exploring into the area of subconsciousness of some forgotten memories in the past, so that a patient will be diagnosed for treatment. Hypnotherapist will put the mind into a state in which the patient apparently loses the power of voluntary action and is highly responsive to suggestion or direction. Its use in therapy, typically to recover suppressed memories or to allow modification of behavior by suggestion. Secondly, in mantra meditation of ancient time, which is a kind of self-hypnotizing by reciting short sacred words such as the name of God with supreme faith. In this circumstance, the mind is forced to dwell to the subconsciousness of a specific imaginary predetermined base of existence for supernatural power, such as being in heaven or hell or even meeting with God with supreme imagination. This technique is very popular among religious practice from which all kinds of supernatural stories come from. Most religious practices are based on this kind of similar meditation technique, only using different short sacred word of the name of different God. However, as being at the subconsciousness level, it is difficult to determine what experiencing during self-hypnosis is real or unreal in a special base of neither perception nor non-perception. Thirdly, the Buddha discovered on the day of his enlightenment that by having mindfulness to abandon unwholesome inside the mind, then the mind will become seclusion, which is the state of being peaceful from any disturbing noises, and then the mind will dwell into the inner mind. This was a new way to dwell the mind to the first jhana. And since then the Buddha introduced a new kind of Buddhist meditation, so-called the mindfulness meditation, as the path and way to see the Dharma inside the inner mind as it really is in the Buddhist practice. That is, instead of being hypnotized or performing self-hypnotizing, the mind has to be fully awakened with mindful to study the mind and its functions. This mindfulness meditation is the distinctive religious practice to study the nature by establishing mindfulness to abandon all kinds of unwholesome thoughts like cleansing dirt covering the mind, so that the mind is internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated, before dwelling into the inner mind of the origin unwholesome thought at the initial thought, and then making use of mindfulness to abandon this initial thought by liberated thinking. After then the mind will be in a special state of equanimity, of which the mind will be mental calmness, composure, and evenness of any arising mental phenomenon, so-called purified mindfulness. And now it is ready to perform insight observation to explore into the inner mind to see the mind processing in the process of dependent origination. The Buddha suggested to perform the insight observation as a way to study the human mind, its functions, especially those affecting states of mind in responding to stimulus from the world. And this is the reason why the main takeaway of the Buddha enlightenment is the discovery of the process of dependent origination, in order to develop a proper strategy of Dharma to liberate the mind. The mechanism of keeping an eye following the swinging pendulum ball backward and forward in modern hypnotherapy is similar to the mechanism of reciting a short sacred word in mantra meditation. That is, whenever the mind is thinking of something else, then tries to pull the mind back to focus on the swinging pendulum or the sacred word, so that the mind will be concentrated on the swinging pendulum or the sacred word. This technique can be compared like tie a rope to a calf to a pole, and then no matter the calf will walk away in any direction, the rope will pull the calf not to go anywhere, and eventually the calf will be tame not to walk around. So does the mind will be tame, and to be concentrated by meditation power. However, the Buddha strongly criticized this type of practice that by reciting a short sacred word in mantra meditation with supreme faith as a blind faith. The Buddha explained that the mantra meditation could not abandon any kinds of the unwholesome thoughts of the 5 lower fetters, and definitely it was not the way to enlightenment to see the insight for wisdom development. The Buddha further explained that this kind of technique although was able to force the mind to be concentrated for a short while, and after then, the mind would lost the concentration by disturbing hindrances. The Buddha compared this mantra approach like putting a stone on top of the growing grasses of unwholesome. In this cases grasses may be contained for a while, but once taking out the stone off the grasses of unwholesome, the grasses will resume to grow up again. This is the reason why in Buddhism, all kinds of problems must be studied further to the root cause of the problem, and then gain the knowledge as wisdom to resolve the problem rightly. Therefore, it is very essential to completely cleanse the outer mind from any disturbing noises first, just like peeling off each shell of onion layer by layer before getting into the core of onion. While in mantra meditation, the mind is forced to dwell into the inner mind without resolving any unwholesome thought of the 5 lower fetter, and this is reason why the Buddha explained that the mantra meditation could not abandon any kinds of the unwholesome thoughts of the 5 lower fetters, and definitely it was not the way to enlightenment to see the insight for wisdom development.